Let's begin our plenary presentations, and we're going to start with what is undoubtedly a very hot topic. It is encryption. Customers want it, for obvious reasons, to safeguard their data. Governments, though, are far less keen because it makes the whole task of justified surveillance, and what a can of worms that is, it makes that task that much more challenging. Crypto is dead. Long live crypto is the title of this presentation. The speaker is the Chief Information Security Officer at KPN Telecom here in the Netherlands. Ladies and gentlemen, Jaya Baloo.
Good morning. Just going to grab the clicky thing. We live in a golden age for global surveillance. Everybody agree? Yeah. We've got your location data, so we know where you are. We know who you talk to. And intelligence agencies can build an entire dossier of your digital life. These agencies have a justifiable fear of crypto. The question is it actually justifiable? And they call it the going dark problem. That means there are pockets, areas that they can't see, and for them it's dark. So what you notice is that even for the public, despite the Snowden revelations, there's actually a lack of public opinion that's informed, that's outraged, that feels incensed by the fact that the government can do this. Have you seen the John Oliver video over cryptography and Snowden? And yeah? So he puts it in a very personal context of people are only incensed that the government can see their data when it is about revealing nude pictures of themselves. So outside the area of nude pictures, we're okay with it. Are you okay with it? How many of you remember the original crypto wars in the 1990s? Okay, there's a couple of you. That's not a lot. The reason I ask this is because in the 1990s, some of you might have been 7 and using your Commodore 64 for the first time, but those of you that actually experienced this crypto wars it was an attempt by the government to prevent the use of strong cryptography outside of the United States. So people within the US could use it, but if you wanted to export it, you needed to have a State Department license, basically, to do this export of cryptography. And basically this war, one of the primary proponents was Louis Freeh. He was the then director of the FBI. He has a stunning career. He apparently brought down the mafia. He investigated Bill Clinton and managed to fight the war on terror. Quite the CV. You can laugh, by the way, that's okay. So what do Freeh, James Comey, the current director of the FBI, David Cameron, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, as well as representatives in the Chinese government want? They basically don't want cryptography, which they can't bypass. And Comey is quite clear. He says he doesn't want a back door, he wants a front door. He wants the ability to have, with the appearance of a court warrant, the ability to bypass this encryption and manage to read it anyway, whatever the messages are or the hardware encryption that's there. And now we're talking about something which is called golden key management. The ability to have this golden key, which can unlock everything, and it's only in the hands of the authorities that are then allowed to use it. This presents issues. One of the proposed answers to this is to have a split key, so that you split the key, so that it takes several parts of that key together to actually be able to unlock anything. So what does it require? It requires very good technical implementation, and it requires flawless execution by all these parties. Does it sound like a good job for big government? Okay, I'll let you be the judge of that. So the Chinese proposed anti-terrorism law has now just been taken and put on hold to revise the language, but it would require that any company wanting to do business in China would have to be able to surrender their keys to the Chinese authorities. I'd like to show you a video, and what you're about to see is actually not a video talking about crypto. It was supposed to be a budget hearing. But during the budget request hearing for the FBI director, James Comey, got posed a couple of questions.
The new iPhone 6s have an encryption in it that you can't get into they're encrypted and there's no backdoor key. And just wanted to know what, and of course this is different from their predecessors, the other phones were able to get into. What is your, what is the FBI's position on Apple and Google's decision both to encrypt these smartphones?
We have a huge problem where we in law enforcement, state, local, and federal, and in national security work are increasingly, when we have court process, right, judges issue search warrants or interception orders, we are unable to execute on those orders. And because the device is locked or the communications are encrypted. And so we're drifting to a place where a whole lot of people are going to look at us with tears in their eyes and say, what do you mean you can't? Right? My daughter's missing. You have her phone. What do you mean you can't? Tell me who she was texting with before she disappeared. And I keep saying to folks, as a democracy should never drift. Maybe that's where we want to go, but I think we have to have a conversation in this country about where are we going. I don't want backdoors, right? I want, with court process, the ability to gather evidence after I've shown probable cause to believe on that device is evidence of a crime. The Fourth Amendment is clearly in play, and I follow it and I get authority. We need to discuss if we're going to go to a place where we can't get access. So it's a huge feature. We're discussing it with sheriffs and chiefs, raise it with me everywhere in the country, and say these are important in domestic violence cases, child exploitation cases, car wrecks, and I don't know exactly what the answer is, but it's something we have to talk about.
Okay, so James Comey actually sounds quite reasonable. He wants to only be able to do this when there's a presentation of legal doubt, of reasonable doubt. It's given to a judge. The judge signs off a court order, and then we can follow through with that information. But the real issue is that it's almost reasonable, because in a way, this is lazy thinking. And why is it lazy thinking? Because we know that crypto won't actually impair these efforts. You don't actually need the smartphone to figure out who this girl in question that he cited as an example has been texting to. Ask AT&T. They can tell you. Or Verizon can tell you. So really what we're saying is, we know that crypto won't impair their efforts to do proper law enforcement. And telcos can help here by giving them the same court order and asking for the same information. And I think ultimately what I'm trying to address with this example is that it's a balance, of course. And it's not just a balance for privacy, but what I contend that this is a bigger balance for security. In order to be able to secure our customers, you need cryptography. And is it true that you can't build a complete picture with these couple of dark spots? I contend that the answer here is no. You can build a perfectly good picture without disabling the features of cryptography that are put on by both Apple and Android. One more video, if you will. I just want you to see how this example is also addressed when looking at it from a different angle.
Let me ask you about another area of the world, China. Are you concerned about how hard China is making it for U.S. tech companies to do business there?
I am concerned. This is something that I've raised directly with President Xi and my entire foreign policy team, as well as people like Secretary of Treasury Jack Lew and Secretary of Commerce Penny Pritzker have raised with them. They've got a couple of laws that are working their way through the system that would essentially force all foreign companies, including U.S. companies, to turn over to the Chinese government mechanisms where they could snoop and keep track of all the users of those services. And as you might imagine, tech companies are not going to be willing to do that. Those kinds of restrictive practices, I think, would ironically hurt the Chinese economy over the long term because I don't think there's any U.S. or European firm, any international firm that can credibly get away with that wholesale turning over of data, personal data, over to a government. And so we've made very clear to them that this is something they're going to have to change if they expect to do business with the United States.
Okay, let me close with a lightning round, yes or no questions. Yeah. Keystone veto just happened. How soon do you think we'll have a decision from the State Department and ultimately the White House?
So, again, you see my argument being made for me by Obama. He says it himself. These restrictive practices will not be tolerated by these companies. So why would we ask other companies to do those same restrictive practices in the United States? And one thing is clear, that the U.S. policy on this issue casts an extremely long shadow on the rest of the world, who's trying to figure out what they need to do to enable law enforcement while at the same time protecting their citizens and guaranteeing security and safety. So there's one more issue here that Comey brought up, which is the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment in the United States is basically the right to search and seizure. However, he ties up that right to search and seizure with this ability to say, well, there's no realm of private space that can be truly private. Why not? Because those two things, the right to search and seizure, so the ability to search something, doesn't actually mean, as a correlating argument, that there's no realm of private space. That wasn't the actual intention of that principle. So if you take it and extrapolate it further, if you take a look at the Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms, I don't know how many of you can read the actual comic there, but it's basically the idea that had we considered crypto as a weapon that couldn't be freely exported, we might have been in a better place from a United States perspective, because you also have a Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms. So that means you always have the right to encrypt, and that crypto actually becomes a right that can be guaranteed. And cryptography actually helps us protect other rights, like the right of free speech, the right of a free press, fair trial, freedom of association, the right to dissent and disagree with your government. But what I think is also really important for all of us is, we said it just a moment ago, we want the Netherlands to be a place to do business, a safe place to do business. And if we want that, and we want the ability to have fair competition, then we also need cryptography, because that will keep us strong and safe. In order to do this correctly, we have to figure out, what are we going to do about this mass surveillance? What are we going to do about the dragnet practices that are happening? And if you look, after Snowden, there was quite a bit of emotion in legislative bodies to do something about this problem. So the original writers of the Patriot Act, the writer and the introducer Lee and Sensenbrenner, had actually said no fair reading of the Patriot Act could have justified the way that it was actually implemented. And subsequent to that, they initiated the U.S. Freedom Act. Does anybody know about that? Okay, then I'm going to explain it. Basically, it was an act that was put through Congress. It actually failed in the Senate, but initially passed in the House after being significantly weakened. And Sensenbrenner and Lee both said that it hadn't actually prevented dozens of terrorist attacks, the Patriot Act. So it was a time for real substantial reform, really comprehensive reform that would take a look at all the intelligence agencies, their practices, their powers, their tools, and fundamentally make it possible to do transparent oversight of what was capable. The fact that it failed means that since the Snowden revelation, it could have been a revolution, since the Snowden revelations, there hasn't actually been any consistent overhaul of the powers that have been presented with the Surveillance Act of the United States. And even a slight modification of that was also opposed. If you take a look at the Investigative Powers Tribunal that was from the GCHQ, it stated that 7 years of cooperation between the GCHQ and the NSA were actually illegal. There was a UK commission that deemed that it was illegal, but still there hasn't been any massive reform in the United Kingdom. If you take a look in the Netherlands, we have now a reform that's coming up over the Wet van de Inlichting en Veiligheidsdiensten, but it's currently in draft. And what that means is we don't know if that's actually an expansion of powers or actual overhaul of the current state. Finally, I am concerned about that expansion of powers, because one of the comments that was made earlier is that if you looked at the mechanism for how terrorists actually work, Al-Qaeda, they didn't actually send any mail. When they were communicating each other, it was by logging into an email provider and then keeping everything in their drafts folder, which required then the authorities to actually break into that service provider in order to get any information about the Al-Qaeda terrorists. But this is a much more expansive right, that right to hack, than the right to intercept. And it's far more active and can cause far more disruption. So what you overall see between all the different governments is that their calls to actions aren't uniform, and rather than actually overhauling the intelligence regulation, we're talking about expanding powers. This puts service providers into a pretzel. They're pulled into different directions because there's a global phenomenon here of nationalism. If you look in China, they want to stop being dependent on corporations like Microsoft and be reliant on homegrown Chinese products for both basic business use, but as well as cryptography, and create for their national connectivity splinter nets. Telecom operators who were initially asked to have open, free, fair, global communications are now being asked for the actual opposite. So not so open, not so global, and quite closed to a particular group. There's also the initiative of Hackback that I just mentioned, and actually that goes fundamentally against what most telecom operators are asked to do in guaranteeing continuity, and you'll see that across the place with clean pipes versus net neutrality, trying to keep something safe but not able to actually inspect any traffic. It makes it very difficult. And I call it the Three Musketeers principle, which is you do everything for one target. And then this one target can cause a zero-day vulnerability that actually affects us all and all of our customers and users. And it trickles down these effects. So if we actually take a look at Hackback and we take a look at the zero-day market, and you're allowed then as a government to keep 0 days for yourself as long as you can use it to position a potential suspect, those vulnerabilities will not be in the domain. It's pure arrogance to assume that those vulnerabilities will be only available for the government users and not for criminal users at any point in time. It brings us down to a very fundamental question of this entire debate. Who do you trust with trust? Do you trust the government? Do you trust service providers, Apple, standards bodies, app writers? Basically, it means layers of complexity, because that's how we work. If you don't want to be connected, it's easy, but if you want to be connected, you've got to learn that there are some required basic trust, and that means that we need to only bolster this trust with layers of transparency and supervision. In 2020, there's a call from Etsy to say that we need post-quantum cryptography in place by everybody. And why do we need that? Because there's an expectation that somebody is going to actually build a quantum computer, which will factorize, using Shor's algorithm, all of the public cryptography that we have today and kill RSA, kill a whole bunch of algorithms that we use everywhere. I think the only people that can actually afford one is probably NSA, Google, and China, but D-Wave, which is a commercial company in the United States, claims to have already started building one. I included little pictures, but there are people who contend that if you look at it under a microscope, it's not actually a quantum computer. In any case, there is actual work being done, and the work around post-quantum crypto requiring us to actually implement new cryptographic technology is significant. 2020 is around the corner. If we don't all have it started in our implementation tracks now, we're not going to get there by 2020 in the post-quantum world. How many of you are already ready for this world? Okay, that's what I thought, but okay, thank you for that. The way that I see this is really that we have a time now. It's actually a new episode, if you will, in the crypto wars debate. There is time for hope. I believe that, otherwise I wouldn't be standing here in front of you. I'd be crying in my bed at home. I think we need to reject all calls for any form of weakening current encryption policies. This golden key management, the split key principle, I don't think it will work. I think it will fail in execution, and we can't afford failure. You heard Hans say, failure is not tolerable. So what we need to do is promote real standards that are principled and they don't jeopardize the democratic institutions that we stand for or impugn the civil liberties that we're trying to protect while making sure that public safety is is also conducted. And we need to make sure we build or get your vendors to build more secure computing and communications infrastructure. And, you know, everyone's saying it over and over again. We've got an opportunity here with the GCCS. Let's make sure we get policymakers informed and realize what they have to do. And finally, let's require that the burden of proof to make it clear what we're actually talking about in this debate, why do we even need to consider this at all to weaken encryption policies, that debate, just like the data retention debate, be put firmly in the hands of law enforcement. They have to tell us why. And if they can't do that effectively, which James Comey can't, then there's no need to even consider this. And a last bit of advice, if I may. Live well, laugh often, and encrypt absolutely everything. Thank you. Thanks.
Jaya, thank you so much. I just want, is anyone in the audience got a question they would really like to put to Jaya? I wasn't intending to go to the audience here, but I just sense that there may have been some issues raised which somebody in the audience would wish to respond to. Can you see a hand?
Yeah, right there.
Ah, yeah, okay. Shout it out, sir. Because I don't think we have any... Oh, hang on. I've got a microphone here, I've just remembered. You stay there while I come down here with a microphone. And please, let's hear from...
So, GCHQ hacked Belgacom. Do you have any notions or ideas that the same thing might have happened with KPN?
That's a very good question. No, I don't. And after the Belgacom incident, I can tell you that we took the indicators of compromise that we could get from our partners, from our telco partners, and we also looked for those in our network. But if you also know, I mean, recently there was an issue with Gemalto. And we're going to keep hearing about this. So the same applies. Also there, we looked for, could we be potentially vulnerable? And until thus far, we haven't found anything. But again, you know, you only find what you're looking for, and then you have to look in the right spots. So it's something that we are saying is a continuous effort, and we have to keep doing if we want to know.
Okay, we got another question. Gentleman here, please.
A very recent research showed that in the Netherlands, for example, only 19% of government websites uses HTTPS. So you might well ask everybody to use encryption, but we need to communicate with our government. And if our government doesn't, where are we standing then?
I agree. That's an excellent point. And for those of you that are still allowed to vote in the United States, Hillary Clinton is using HTTPS on her campaign website, so take that, Jeb Bush.
Okay, we've not got much time. Does anyone else have a question or a point that they'd like to... okay, there's a couple. There's always a... Yeah, all right, here we go. I'm going to get a bit of exercise. Here we are. Yes, please, sir.
Thank you very much. Peter Davids, World Federalist Movement. I really liked your introduction that you said if you go further to the west from the Silicon Valley, you get to the Pacific region. And if you go to the east, you go through the Atlantic. My question, I really liked your statement and advice that we need to build democratic institutions, which is a basic statement. We are born as biologically as world citizens, but we don't have the legal and cooperative institutions. Now we have this new geography, cyberspace. Do you see a role for the United Nations Military Committee under the Security Council of the United Nations to be one of the smart coalitions possible for private-public partnership cooperation and maybe innovative thinking in this very new area since 1993 or so, under the sun?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. A role for the UN in all of this?
I'm a big fan of the UN. Both my parents worked for the United Nations for 35 years in New York, so huge fan. However, that being said, I've also seen the less pretty side of the UN. I'm fully in favor of that public partnership you suggested, but I think we need to do more. The internet is probably the best example of a democratic anything. It's a free space, and I think that's the thing that we need to actually look at. How do we preserve that while still making sure that, it's not open up for complete lawlessness? So I don't know if the UN is the best partner to have that happen, but certainly the ITU can play a role there as a UN body, and I think national governments need to play a stronger role, not so much in supervision and curtailing it, but promoting that openness.
I mean, these are huge questions, aren't they? Who should be the world policeman of cyberspace? Perhaps something that the GCCS will address later in the week. One question from me, if I may. I'm non-technical, as you know. Is it correct that... let me start again. Law enforcement are against encryption because they see it as a threat to them doing their job effectively. Is it the case that the kind of encryption which is available to the sort of average citizen causes all those clever types at the NSA and GCHQ and the Dutch equivalent problems on the scale that they appear to suggest that they cause them?
If I understand, so first of all, I think law enforcement is in favor of poor encryption. So they like encryption as long as they can break into it. So the commercially available variants, so there's lots of them. There's chat platforms that are free. There's hardware encryption platforms that are free. And the ones that they can't break cause significant challenges for them. But I don't think that those challenges warrant the type of powers that they're requesting to actually further break them. So I believe that they can get the information they need without causing those dark spots through alternative mechanisms like interception, like cooperating with telcos and other service providers.
So in effect, they are, as it were, overstating the difficulties that they face, which is kind of what I was asking, because they have a particular viewpoint on all of this, which they want to pursue.
Absolutely. If you were to turn back the clock 20 years and say, right, you won't have the encryption problem, but you also won't be able to do surveillance on this scale. What would you prefer? They would always prefer to be today, here, with the encryption challenges they have and the surveillance capabilities that they have, because they are unparalleled.
Okay. It's important to just note that I'm sure that there may be people in this audience who will have very different opinions on all of that, and we will perhaps have a chance to pursue them. Have you got a very quick question? A very quick question. It'll have to be, because otherwise we're eating into coffee time. But please go ahead.
Thank you. Inge Phillips from the National Criminal Investigation Division of the Netherlands, and I do beg to defer, dear Jaya, on that one point, that law enforcement is, per definition, in favor of weak encryption, because that is not the case. Because it is our task to protect citizens in real life, as in cyberspace, but that is real life. So anything that a citizen does to protect himself is something that I am, per definition, in favor of. And it is not by weakening encryption that we seek our possibilities in surveillance. It is by smart coalitions and working with people like you.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to hear that. That's really good.
Well,
thank you.
And what's even better is that, thanks to you, we've got off to a flying start with a very lively debate on a very, very lively and hot topic. Jaya Baloo, thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed.